consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in very strong support of H.R. 4293, the Stress Test Improvement Act of 2017. And I want to thank the gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin, who is a real workhorse on the Financial Services Committee and a real leader in trying to ensure that we have affordable credit for our constituents so that they can achieve the American dream. And in his legislation, he will bring clarity and reasonableness to the stress test regime. Currently, as we know, banks face two separate legally mandated stress tests, what is the CCAR and the DFAST. And together, these two programs constitute one of the greatest expansions of the Federal Reserve's supervisory powers in recent history. But what's important to note, Mr. Speaker, is that in addition to these mandated stress tests, banks conduct stress tests every single week on some asset class or another. It's important. It's important to know how banks can withstand tough, stormy financial weather, but this was taking place even prior to either DFAST or CCAR. But what has happened now, Mr. Speaker, is these particular tests are incredibly onerous to where the reports are not just measured in the pages, they're measured in the pounds. And it's doubtful that anyone actually reads them. And then to compound the challenge, Mr. Speaker, the Federal Reserve's stress tests have become kind of a cat and mouse exercise in which the Fed staff and compliance officers attempt to outwit each other in a game that has no rules and no transparency. In other words, it's a secret test. Nobody really knows what's on it. It's difficult for Congress, it's difficult for our markets, it's difficult for the public to even assess whether or not these tests are effective. And Mr. Speaker, it's very important to note, if you don't know what's on the test, how can you adhere to the rule of law if you don't know what the law is? And so something really needs to change here. Now, it's fortunate that yesterday, the Federal Reserve finally took actions to begin to simplify and reform the CCAR stress testing regime. Recognizing the opacity of the stress test regime, Federal Reserve Vice Chairman for Supervision, Randy Quarles, said in a statement, quote, "Regulatory measures are most effective when they are as simple and transparent as possible." I couldn't agree more, as does the gentleman from New York as well. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this particular proposal is somewhat modest in its attempt to simplify the process. It does follow the results of a review undertaken by former Fed Chair Yellen, which found a need to reduce the burden resulting from stress testing requirements. Almost everybody agrees with that, especially on our smaller financial institutions. And so that's one more reason why this is needed. So I'm glad the Federal Reserve recognizes the need to reform the stress test regime because, again, it contributes to a climate of legal and regulatory uncertainty when the rule of law is so critical to the foundation of our society, and it's so critical to economic growth. But in light of the Fed's announcement yesterday, it's also important to point out what the Fed did can easily be undone next week, next month, or next year. That's why it's critical that Congress has to make improvements in the stress testing regime permanent, especially for the CCAR process, which is not, I repeat, not a creation of statute. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin, has come up again with just the right bill, H.R. 4293, and it will help provide a common sense and, oh, by the way, bipartisan reforms that will inject badly needed accountability, transparency, and targeted relief to reduce legal and regulatory uncertainty for financial institutions. You know, why is this important, Mr. Speaker? At the end of the day, it's not really the banks that are the subject of these regulations. At the end of the day, it's their customers. And what this committee and what this House has to do is ensure that there is affordable and available credit to help fund people's American dreams. You know, I heard from a gentleman by the name of John in my district from Mesquite, Texas, who said, credit helped me obtain my first home, and 13 years later, I'm still in it. It has helped us grow from one child when we moved in to 4. Ran into some bad times, but was able to withstand it all with the help of the available credit lines that I had at the time. Without the credit, it would have been nearly impossible to still be where me and my family are today. That's why it's so important, Mr. Speaker. People need credit to pay their bills, to buy their homes, to pay for their car repairs, and all of these regulations, the regulatory onslaught that has been taking place for almost a decade, makes that credit less available, more expensive. It shrinks the American dream, and we can't allow that to happen on our watch, Mr. Speaker, and that's why it is so important that we bring some rationality to the stress test so that hopefully people like John and Mesquite continue to get that line of credit. And that's why it's so important that we all vote for H.R. 4293 today, and I reserve the balance of my time.